piece. Could I ask Amanda Feldman, Andrew Peeler, Chris Brown, and Tim Sullivan to come up and sit here on the front? That would be fabulous. So as our start, we're going to hear 4 different perspectives that will give us a view on how we can break through those barriers to transform energy, water, and waste performance. These are going to be 4 10 to 15-minute presentations, and at the end, we're going to have 15 minutes for question and answers. Some of those questions will be coming from our global audience over the 2 Degrees platform, and I hope an awful lot will come from you in the room. So, firstly, I welcome Amanda Feldman, Director of Impact and Innovation at Volans. Amanda will talk to us about the Breakthrough Challenge, what it's going to take for businesses and capital markets to be effective forces for change in ensuring a healthy, fair, and affordable world as we move towards 9 billion people. She's going to share Volans' insights on how to mobilize new forms of capital, value, and metrics in the pursuit of ambitious targets. How do we get away from incrementalism to really making those breakthroughs in companies, across industries, and through markets? So, big hand for Amanda, please. Yes, this is there.
No pressure, Martin. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, Friday morning. How is everyone? How many are jet lagged? Who's flown in for this? So at my table, there's a few people who flew in. Well, welcome, and I am opening up here today with probably what's going to be one of the more higher level sessions and 15-minute chats you're going to have in the day, because you're going to dive really deep, as I hear, into your challenges and those top 5 challenges that Martin put on the screen. I'm going to talk today, as Martin mentioned, about the Breakthrough Challenge as we frame it at Volans. I work with a really amazing intergenerational team. I might be the youngest speaker today, and that's how I feel at Volans every day. And it's quite exciting, and I'll explain a little bit later why that's an exciting part of what we do and how we do what we do. But what we do every day is work with people like you on your challenges to figure out what is around the next corner, what are we focusing on. And coincidentally, Martin, recently, a book came out on behalf of Volans called The Breakthrough Challenge. So I'm just going to flag that now as sort of a key overlap in terms of the event today and how we think about the kind of challenges we are up against. I'm just going to talk briefly about the higher level of summing up basically where all of you are at and sort of figuring out some of what are we aiming for? What are the targets we're working towards? They did warn me this was backwards. So what are you guys doing every day, and how do we sort of see this from our perspective? So I work with a man who you all might know named John Elkington, and frequently over the past sort of 40 years, and for me over the past 10, been looking around how do we start to think around corners in a way that is going to be more effective in how we reach those challenges that we're up against, both within corporates, but also across the wider system in policy and in nonprofit and social enterprise space. We are often in a room with sort of a number of your colleagues and stakeholders, and I saw challenge number 1 is how do we drive this, how do we drive our challenge through to the other stakeholders in the company that really need to hear this and change mindsets around it. And building that constructive discomfort, which hopefully today is mostly constructive and not uncomfortable. But how do we guide internal change agents within companies, intrapreneurs, if you will, to scale their ideas and really figure out a way to drive that through supply chains? That is going to involve connecting tomorrow's dots, as we call it, and you'll probably call it a number of other things, but linking selected incumbents in the company, people who have the expertise and knowledge in certain areas and are able to link to inspirational insurgents. And part of at the beginning of our journey was working with social entrepreneurs, disruptors who were building businesses with an unreasonable triple bottom line, people, planet, profit. Increasingly, we're seeing people like yourselves within companies trying to build those business units, trying to change supply chains so they consider those 3 bottom lines. How do we link those inspirational entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs to the kind of people who can engage and make that happen? Equally, how do we co-evolve breakthrough market intelligence that drives that kind of thinking through the company and gets it into the hands of key stakeholders? Today, our challenge, which we were asked to sort of report on, my challenge today, and my colleague Astrid in the back, is figuring out how do we reframe market intelligence from risk to opportunity. When is it that we'll move from just looking at the risks and sort of risk mitigation and actually looking at the opportunity and value creation areas? So that's one area that we are really excited about and focused on. And lastly, accessing new forms of capital is something that we've seen to be a big and important issue in all of the challenges you guys are up against. We are increasingly recognizing the corporate venture capital space as an opportunity to invest in some of the disruptive ideas outside of your company, but also scale some of the internal ventures and ideas that you guys all have. That is all connected. This is a water, you've probably all seen, how many of you have seen this diagram from the World Economic Forum? Okay. Not as many as I thought. It's not exactly what the breakout sessions are today, but it's the water security, food security, and energy security nexus that the World Economic Forum pulled together on the back of a lot of data and sort of research around the challenges we're up against. And we look at this at Volans like a bit of a pressure cooker. No matter what part of it you're working on, you have coming from the bottom population and economic growth. You have environmental pressures. And what that happens as that heats up at the bottom is all of these food security, water security, and energy security issues that are fundamentally interrelated start to heat up. They start to get agitated. They're trying to work through some of those difficult challenges. And at the top, where usually that sort of hot air would pop out, you have global governance failures and economic disparity really blocking that, not able to sort of have the sort of release that we would expect. This is leading to geopolitical conflicts. What we do at Volans is also look sort of, as you all do, the social and environmental challenges. How are they interrelated and how are they connected? And I think what you'll see in this room today, I'm hoping that people are able to move between the three section areas, because a lot of what you guys are all working on, whether you're focused on water or energy or waste, is so interconnected to what we're up against. You probably all have similar challenges no matter what group you're in, and I'm sure 2 Degrees will do a brilliant job monitoring that and focusing on that. But that's the interconnection that we're really curious about and want to enable across sectors and across industries. Now, your challenges today might be at any point on sort of a spectrum, a pathway, if you will, a journey that you're on and your organization is on. How many of you have had a really exciting idea about something you could do differently, a eureka moment? You've seen an opportunity in sort of existing dysfunction or function, and you're really hoping to get more ideas from the rest of the room today about how to bring that forward. Whose challenges are more like that? Got it. It's okay. It's good. So usually those eureka moments are sort of buried deep inside us, whether we're sort of the specialty that we're focusing on. And then what happens is we've seen that people start to experiment with it. Those innovators sort of say, okay, here's an idea. How do we find the people in our organization or outside of our organization that we can start to test this with? That next phase is the more hands-on, getting hands dirty, but it could fail. And that's okay. Who's at the experiment stage of their idea and working across their company to find the key stakeholders to work with on it? A few more. Excellent. And what we find from there is once that experimenting phase moves forward, either it just fails and we learn that the challenge is still there, but maybe that solution that we developed isn't quite what was needed. So how do we get that from the experimental level, if it is an interesting and engaging idea and something that actually turns into a solution, to the enterprise level, something that fits into the P&L, something that maybe is spun in or spun out from the current business models? Who's building on an existing sort of a solution across the supply chain that is then enabled to sort of scale throughout the company? Who's at that stage of building it through scale? Okay, so a few more experiments than enterprise. The place that we're really interested in you guys connecting on today around the areas at your tables are between the ecosystem and economy bit. So once we sort of get those ideas scaled through your company, how do we connect that with the right partners and the right people across industries to drive that forward? And lastly, what we work on at Volans in terms of breakthrough capitalism. How do we embed that new kind of value into the economy and encourage other people to come up with their own eureka moments and experiments to drive that forward? So the breakthrough challenge, as we see it, over the course of the day, I hope that these 10 steps, these 10 challenge areas will be something that you guys can take forward, think about in your respective challenges, and potentially debate, because these are all really, really big things that we can all work towards, and also get into a few examples here about how we see this happening. So adopt the right aspirations. I think the people in this room have come here with really high aspirations. But there was an Accenture study a few years ago that you guys might know about, where they surveyed 766 CEOs and said, have you embedded sustainability in your business? And 81% said yes. Now, I don't know what they meant by sustainability or what they thought they were embedding, but I think we can all agree that 81% of those CEOs had a pretty different definition, and that we need to embed something much more systemic and holistic into the kind of work that we're doing. So adopt the right aspirations. Let's figure out, beyond the terminology, what are the challenges we're up against, and how are we embedding those new forms of returns and value within the business. Building new corporate structures. Who has heard of a B Corp? A B Corporation, a benefit corporation. So we are a benefit corporation. We're increasingly seeing very big companies step up and say, we will also get certified as a benefit corporation. What does that mean? It means that social and environmental mission are embedded into the strategy and mission of what a company does. And there are a number of really fascinating metrics, if you want to have a look on their site, in terms of how to reach that, how we can certify something like that. I think all of the work and challenges you guys are up against, you guys are increasingly proving that there is a way to do that, and new corporate structures are needed in order to sort of identify those who are on the leading edge, but also encourage investors to value businesses differently around the kind of work they are doing. My background is a bit varied, from public health policy and then working with Tata in India, where 66% of the profits go to trust. And it just blew my mind, coming from the States, as you can tell by my accent, that there was a way in which a privately held company, to be fair, was able to sort of give 66% of profits back to trust, not as CSR, but because at the time they built their company, without that wider ecosystem being strengthened, they didn't have a business or a business case. And I think we've lost sight of that as I sit here in London talking through that, but I think there's a lot that we can learn from the kind of strategies that some companies are pursuing. Number 3 is apply true accounting principles. Who has heard of Puma's environmental profit and loss sheet? Okay, it's the most hands we've seen, so accounting is something on all of your minds. John and Jochen co-wrote this book, so it's one of the things that's most highlighted in terms of reporting on the kind of environmental costs and benefits of basically what's happening with the environmental resources that Puma is using. You might have known, if you've heard about this initiative, that they recorded a higher loss than their earnings that entire year on their environmental profit and loss, and made that public. What I see in this is not that everyone in this room should run and go develop an environmental profit and loss sheet, although I'm sure it's a good start. But what Jochen noticed was that there was a way to use the language of his company, something that everyone understood in terms of the profit and loss sheet, and translate that to include some of the environmental issues they were facing and the resources. They're also working on a social profit and loss sheet, which will be really interesting to see when it comes out. But something to consider: what is the language that your company is using, or that you think you can get the message through to? And if it's around numbers and accounting, which it may be for this room, then how do we reframe that? Number 4 is calculating true returns from that. So water, the unpaid environmental cost, as calculated about a year ago, was 1.9 trillion, which is 2.5% of GDP. How do we start to recognize that that is a true cost and a true value that we are constantly using within our supply chains? And then not only report that into accounting, but optimize on that value. So something you're all going to go into in your sessions today. 5 is not just about efficiency, I don't think. It goes beyond that. It's about embracing well-being and recognizing that a business is a group of people who are focused on building businesses that will last and also will provide for the next generation. So this is something that is important to us to consider and goes into the last one as well, which is keeping the long run in mind. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So even though the quarterly reports will tell you otherwise, how do we think about the challenges in this room for the longer term? Leveling the playing field. How many of you work on the policy side of things or work on trying to convince other stakeholders or potentially policymakers of the kind of work you're doing? Okay. Obviously, there are some market distortions that every sort of group in this room will be up against in their companies, whether it's about subsidies or incentives. We are seeing creativity, in a way, around bringing people together and industries together around that. The Zero Discharge of Hazardous Chemicals campaign was convened by the apparel industry. Is anyone here from the apparel industry? No. Oh, one back there. Basically, a number of the biggest brands in apparel came together and said that actually, if we want to affect our suppliers' behavior around zero toxics, we need to do it together. Otherwise, they'll just stop working with one of us, and then the rest of the suppliers will remain the same. And this is probably a big issue that you all are up against. So they came together and they said, this is our roadmap, and this is how we're going to encourage suppliers to give us products that don't include these harmful chemicals. That is an exciting cross-sector collaboration, but the most interesting part was a few years in, you had chemical companies coming to the table. And they said, actually, one of the biggest challenges is these suppliers don't have different chemicals they can use. Therefore, if you're all up for this and you're willing to collaborate around this, we are willing to supply you with the kind of chemicals that you need to make your products while not being toxic. And basically, there was a higher incentive than ever before for chemical companies, no matter the cost of the R&D, to think about what other chemicals they could be using. A really interesting way of incentivizing that sector to take this a bit more seriously than they might have otherwise. Pursuing full transparency around circular economy. I'm sure this is going to be something today that you all discuss in terms of transparency, both within your teams and also across other competitors in your sector. How do we start using transparency as a competitive advantage and an exciting prospect in terms of measuring the value that we're creating? Redefining education. Luckily, we don't just have to look within to sort of build this. I did an MPA, which we lovingly called the MBA for the public sector. We kind of thought it was an MBA with a heart, if you will. MPA, MBA, whatever you are looking at, it doesn't fully bring in this kind of curriculum around how we are building business for a better world and with efficiency and effectiveness at the core. So around STEM education, a lot of industries in here will have trouble with that. How do we start to bring that into business schools and other schools and encourage people to think about this from the start? Luckily, we're not starting from ground zero. We have learning from nature's model is just a reference to biomimicry and some of the other places beyond school, looking out to nature about how we can bring nature's model into the core of the work and innovation that we're doing. And lastly, keeping the long run in mind, as I said, I think this is the most important thing. It's the hardest thing. It's trying to think beyond the next quarter and a little bit beyond the next year, but 5 and 10 years in the future, where actually some of the challenges that you guys have will actually reach fruition. So if I had 3 tips for your breakthrough challenge, I'd give it a bit of stretch. I don't know. I hope to meet a few of you today and hear a bit more about your challenges. But one, how can you build zero-based targets around the challenges that you're up against? How can we move from 5% reduction in the next 10 years to 0 in the next 5 or 10? How do we stretch what we consider possible because we don't have much time, as 2 degrees in the title will know. Deeper analysis. We would be excited if every company had a CSO or a chief breakthrough officer or something like that. but hopefully with a view to be made redundant, because that would then mean that their mission and their values were embedded across the business. So I know that's a terrible thing to think about, but partly breaking down those silos and making sure everyone's on the journey with you. Wider scope, reaching breakthrough targets by recognizing that one company is not the center of the universe. We often, and something fun to do, is sort of map your ecosystem without putting your company in the middle. It's really fascinating, and hopefully in this room across your tables, you'll see a lot of the overlaps that you guys all have, and that it's about the bigger issues. And lastly, invest in industry disruptors within your company, whether it's about incubating or accelerating some of those eureka moments, but also outside and engaging personally or investing in some of those entrepreneurs that are driving new forms of value. So with that, I thank you for your time this morning. I look forward to hearing all of the conversations and get in touch with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Amanda, for setting the scene. It is a good book. I've read it. I have to say, John's on our advisory board, so I have to say it's a good book. No, it is a good book. And actually, the 10 points give a really interesting high-level roadmap about the essential barriers to making real and lasting change. So let us change the focus slightly now and start coming down into really practical examples inside companies. So I'd like to invite up Andrew Peeler, who's the Commercial and Finance Director at Bupa. Andrew, please come up. Now, Andrew's is a very interesting story. He's going to, you come up, come and join me, exactly. Very interesting. So is Lauren in the room? She is, I know, somewhere. Where is she? Can you stand up, wave your hands? So these are two people who had to engage with each other to come up with what, I'm not going to steal Andrew's thunder, to come up with what Andrew's going to talk about. And it's a very interesting example of turning, if you like, the incentive the other way around. So I leave Andrew to explain.
Thank you very much, Martin. First of all, I'm very pleased to be here to talk about this very, very important topic. And let me introduce myself. Andrew Peeler. I'm the Commercial and Finance Director for Bupa UK. And before you get too nervous, I'm not going to go and talk about true accounting in fine detail and how to run your P&L. What I want to talk about really here is the perspective around the leadership and partnering that finance can bring to an organization to make this happen. First of all, briefly, a little bit about Bupa. Joined it 3 years ago. It's a leading international healthcare group. We have 70,000 people, 22 million customers in 190 countries, and we have significant health insurance businesses, clinics, care homes, hospitals, and a variety of other services we provide in the community. Very importantly, our purpose, which was established probably in 1948 and it still exists now, and is represented by this, by longer, healthier, happier lives, sit at the heart of absolutely everything that we do. And to bring this purpose to life, we've committed to delivering positive impact for both the world health and for the environment. So we've actually made specific commitments. The first thing is a clear one, which is to enable millions of people to make positive changes to be healthier and happier, but also to protect the environment. And we've committed to reduce our carbon footprint by 20% by 2015. And we're not going to cheat. I made sure of this. This is in absolute terms since 2009. So the CEO hasn't helped by spending 1.6 billion on acquisitions, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Very, very importantly, we have no shareholders. So put very simply, our priority is fulfilling our purpose. Therefore, our profits are reinvested in what we do. And I think that's really helped us in thinking about this. Now, in order to reach our 20% commitment, our sustainability and property teams made great efforts to improve our data at first. And to that end, Bupa was the first private healthcare company to be awarded the Carbon Trust Standard in recognition of our carbon data covering 1,500 sites worldwide. So we have very accurate data. This improving data indicated we are quite a long way from reaching our 20% goal. In fact, I remember an incident when I was in the office with Evelyn, who's the CFO for Bupa, and then Stuart, the CEO, marched in and said, "What the hell are we going to do? Because we're miles off." And that was a real spark, I think, to the finance community to say, right, what are we actually sort of going to do? So we have done stuff. I mean, in the UK, we've invested something like 9 million alone just in 2013. And as I mentioned earlier, from 2009 to 2013, we've grown our business globally by a third through both organic growth and merger. And we have, in all fairness, reduced our carbon emissions by 6% during that time period. So Let me first of all talk about the cost of inaction. This is an important thing for finance people to think about, because it's not just about the direct return you get, but the opportunity cost as well. And having quality data available has helped us to understand how much it would cost to get to 20%. And more importantly, what it would cost if we took no action at all. So in terms of increasing energy and carbon costs, the Carbon Trust helped Bupa calculate our cost of inaction would be some 18 million over 14 and 15, and I suspect in reality it's a far bigger number. So when the finance community at Bupa saw these numbers, we realised the need to respond in partnership with our sustainability and property teams. And interestingly, we'd already established a centre of excellence for sustainability and carbon emissions. And since then, the finance team have put ourselves at the heart of this challenge to embed sustainability and increase the financial resilience of the business. So, working together, we created Bupa's Energy Saver Fund, a 50 million budget over 2 years. Now, to put this in some perspective, this is some 10% of Bupa's annual CapEx budget. So it's a very material investment. We've made this distinct investment for these 2 years for low carbon technologies for our care homes, our clinics, hospitals, and indeed our offices as well. And our Chief Financial Officer for Bupa, Evelyn, sponsors this fund along with our Chief Executive, Stuart Fletcher, and our Global Corporate Affairs Director. I am now, hopefully, going to show you a short video that explains the Energy Saver Fund in more detail. Do I do anything? Oh, brilliant. Okay. Thanks very much. As you can see, we have 375 projects planned so far, and the finance community at Bupa is advised on the structure of the fund, what financial conditions should be applied to applications and reporting metrics. We also continue to oversee monthly reporting of Energy Saver Fund allocations, and we carry out post-investment reviews. Within each of our market units, finance directors are partnering with our sustainability and property teams to create the investment and work programs, and each business unit is required to submit business cases for their low carbon initiatives, which, if approved, are funded jointly with our corporate centre. We also have to work within a framework of key financial outcomes. The Energy Saver Fund has been a catalyst internally for a whole range of other activities and benefits. For example, it's triggered Bupa to embark upon its first global procurement process for sustainable sourcing, gaining savings of some 2 million for LED lighting. We've also worked with the Prince of Wales Accounting for Sustainability initiative, and we will embed energy and carbon in Bupa's capital expenditure decision process by the end of the year. So, a few top tips for engaging your finance teams. Critically, it's about engagement and collaboration as soon as possible, identifying the key stakeholders, engagement particularly with the CEO and the CFO, their equivalents, but preferably somebody very senior. Making it clear that this will contribute to business performance. Personally, I've been absolutely stunned at some of the resistance I received around why should you invest in this. And even when you say it's a 4 or 5 year payback, there's always some other reason why that's not important enough. So there's something about the finance team making it very clear there's a very strong correlation between carbon savings and OPEX savings. And use a lot of good data to tell a good story. And whilst it does take a bit of time to put the information in place, make sure that you do it. For me, a crucial thing is to integrate it into the planning process. Both the strategy process and the annual planning process is a crucial thing to do. Make sure you have that dialogue up front, just as much as actually discussing how you're going to sell more. And also monetize the risk of inaction is crucial. I think for me, there's probably one very important thing though, and it's actually around, from a finance point of view, we talk about finance being finance business partners. This is what partnering and leadership is actually all about. And so it does take a bit of bravery on the part of the finance team to stand up and be counted. So on a personal basis, I think from a year or two ago, I committed to spending money even before I'd even got probably proper approval, just because I knew it was the right thing to do. And then, to be honest with you, I kind of winged it. And then it kind of sort of, we seem to sort of go from strength to strength from there. I guess the challenge for all of us, and it's great to see so many people here that are thinking about this anyway, is how do we make this business as usual? Yeah? And how do we engage our colleagues in any part of the organisation to change behaviours on a permanent basis? So we've been thinking about it very hard. I'm convinced we've made some great strides in Bupa to make a big difference. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. So if you want to know the other half of the story about how you engage the fund, you have to talk to Lauren, okay? So you'll get the other. But what for me I thought was most interesting about that story, I've never seen it inside a corporation before, which was the very clear articulation and monetization of the cost of inaction. As the fundamental driver, actually, of the fund and everything else that then happens afterwards. Of course, each individual investment has its own return on investment calculations done with it, as explained. But that idea of pointing out what happens and the cost of what happens if we do nothing, I thought was really very interesting. Thank you, Andrew. So we have some fabulous projects at 2 Degrees and some really great clients we're doing really interesting and great work with. Of which we're very proud and delighted and honoured to be working with them. But one of my favourites, and I don't mean to make Chris Brown blush, but is the work we do at ASDA and the work that ASDA are doing with their supply base and what those suppliers are doing with each other. So I'd like to invite Chris Brown up, if I may, to talk about their focus on efficiency inside the supply base. Thank you. Are you right with the clicker?
Yep. It's on going forward and back. Yep. So good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here. I have to say that what I'm going to present today really isn't my work. It's the work of many of the suppliers who are actually in the room today. So I'm sure they'll correct me if I've presented this in entirely the wrong way. Just as a way of introduction, I know I'm in the home counties, but ASDA is a supermarket chain in the United Kingdom. We sell a lot of stuff. And there's a key point to that, which is to do that, we of course rely on a supply chain. And it's very easy for a large organisation to think about our own impacts. The shift, I guess, which I'd present to you as a challenge I think we need to engage with, wherever we sit within the supply chain, is we need to be talking to the rest of the supply chain, either upstream or downstream, depending on your perspective. And how do you manage to do that? Because it's quite I've got a huge number of suppliers, ranging in competencies, skills, likability, a whole range of attributes. But we all have got some common cause. And it's to try and find a focus which will enable us to drive some traction. The other thing that I would point out is that despite the fact that I sit in Leeds, it's not an ivory tower, I haven't got all the answers. We've got 170,000 colleagues in the UK. We still don't have all the answers, and we have to harness the power, understanding, and knowledge of the people who are supplying us. And the only way that can happen is through trust. It's a bit trite, but trust doesn't come in fractions. So how do I get people who are competitors to each other in a peer group, who don't trust me and certainly don't trust my commercial colleagues, to want to offer up good ideas and share them with other people? And it's an enormous leap of faith. So those of you who are in the room and those who I rely upon as part of this programme, I have a huge debt of gratitude and for the fact that so many of them are engaged with it. And there's also a trust internally as well. So it's interesting, Andrew talking about how to engage with the finance community within Bupa. It's also equally a challenge to engage with the commercial colleagues that I have within Asda. And the way that I've approached that is quite simply not to. There's a point where we can all sit in the room and you can see the eyes glazing over and they're suddenly going, well, I really don't want to talk about something that's 5 years in the hence because I've got a life plan which involves Ferraris and beaches and I really don't want to talk about water. So the way that I've tried to do this is to give some reassurance that I have some semblance of ability and competence and say, don't you, not necessarily condescending, say worry your little heads about it, but we'll do this as a side stream. And that's a safe space for us to work, develop ideas with the supply chain, and then it can come back around and be part of the commercial conversation. And the only way that's been successful is because I've got the endorsement of the senior team within Asda, who are willing to stand up on platforms and say, this is the right thing to do. Again, a bit of faith to say, get on with it, and to look at the results and continue to endorse them. And I think if you start to, I know Amanda was talking about embedding it in your business strategy, and I think that's fine, but embedding it in business activity needs to be done at the appropriate level. And I think some of the work that we're involved with, especially some of the more longer term work, has to be seen as pilots. We therefore can see the results, apply them if it works. If it doesn't work, then no one is overly exposed. So I think there's an appropriateness filter which we need to apply to some of the work that we're doing in these areas. Supply chain for a retailer future-proofs me. Everything I do, in effect, is supplied by that. I don't really need to go through these with the audience that I've got, but the one that I would throw out, and I think is a challenge for us all, is this piece about resources becoming scarce. How do we access supply chains which we rely on, the raw material we require to work through, and ultimately the one at the bottom left, right, which is, for me, a sustainable supplier will have a competitive advantage, which I can then use and build a competitive advantage for myself too. So we developed with 2 degrees the Sustain and Save exchange. The wording is very deliberate because I have business development accountants all over my business that run around getting really excited about case sizes. I didn't want that. That's where this doesn't sit. This comes with a primary focus about, that was quick work. Unless I'm being told to hurry up. Primary focus around the sustainability issues. Again, I hope, and maybe like the suppliers in the room will comment on it. I am struggling here. That if we have the sustainability function first, then again gives us a bit of a license to do some thoughtful courage work. So, whilst that continues on, that is important to me, because if one of the things we have within this space, I have to describe it, so it's a space where people can share best practice. We don't ask people to give the crown jewels, their competitive edge, but where they've applied something which they're proud about, reckon it was interesting, and they're willing to share with other people, then we ask them to do that, and they have been able to do that for us. But there is what we call the golden rule, which is any savings that are made through that approach stay with the supplier. Otherwise, there's a risk that it becomes clear that someone saved £100,000. The first phone call they'll get is from the buyer saying, I understand you've saved £100,000, where's my cut, please? Which is entirely the wrong behaviour. It's not what we want to drive. We want that £100,000 to be then invested in another £100,000 to develop a virtuous cycle of improvement. So that's why we have it. And this is the type of stuff that we can find, where people have explored the information, asked questions, so it's an interactive forum, and been able to generate real savings for their businesses. And these are some of the headline numbers which we've been able to get. That is really quick. So the stage that we've moved on to, the flashing numbers which went through, so they're big numbers. I'm a big industry. I've got over 200 members on this with £7 billion of EPOS sales. So not surprisingly, the numbers look enormous. But then we take it to another level, which is, okay, we've got all these great case studies. How can we then start to see how people are meeting the challenge which we've put to ourselves today around energy, waste and water? And for one category, we asked that information just to see what it would look like. And this has thrown up, again, issues of trust. So what am I going to do with this? Am I going to turn around and say, well, those of you that are on the left-hand side, watch out, because I'm coming in to say you're really inefficient. And this one, and somebody else is obviously on the far right. I'm yet to work out exactly how they're managing to produce something for hardly any energy at all. But that wasn't the idea behind this. Because I've got such a consolidated supply base, in some instances I can't make sensible, relevant comparisons. I have one beef supplier, basically. So they're just going to be compared in the category one. So that doesn't help them at all. So the way that we propose to use this, and I'm honest about it, this is a pilot where we're taking evidence and learning from, is to look at the trends. And that's the trends for each business, each site. To show that people's achievements in reducing their waste, their water, improving their efficiencies is recognised. And to not create an opportunity for us to choose between suppliers, but to recognise superior performance within a supply chain. And these are the types of numbers which we're getting out of it. So we see this as, again, taking this next step forward in terms of giving people, especially those within sustainability functions in our suppliers, real solid metrics to be able to go to their business and get recognition for the good work that's being done. And you can see that I quite like this one because we don't want any waste of any time, so waste going to landfill, and the number which we've been able to report zero waste to landfill is really encouraging. Quite who's taking all their waste to landfill at the moment with the landfill escalator tax, interesting question, but again, having this type of information highlights those types of questions. This is all anonymised to me, and it doesn't go to my trading teams. It stays within the community. And we're also able to see what people are actually doing with the money. So what types of investments are being engaged with. Not surprising, given where we are in the present economic circumstances, that renewable energies and heat recovery take a huge amount of investment. But I think that's really encouraging, especially when you look at my opening slide talking about energy costs doubling by 2020. The other one I quite like is actually, it's one of the smaller ones, monitor, measure and report. I know it's a business school adage that you can't manage something you can't measure, but I think it's really important that people are recognising, being able to put things like sub-metering in, really understand their energy and water uses, give us that opportunity to get some really interesting investments and progress forward, especially some innovation. You would expect me as a retailer to talk a little about the customer. And I think we run a customer panel of 20,000 who volunteer to give us information about sustainability issues. Whilst that was the recruitment, actually when we look at them, it's pretty close to an average demographic for the United Kingdom. 92%, full enough, on a group which said, are you interested in telling us about information on sustainability? 92 say they care about it. The one which strikes me from this, and I'd encourage you to engage with, is that 95% have bought a green product this year. Now that's their definition of green. And we're not telling them what's green, we're not putting a logo on it, it's what they believe is green. So they are engaging and making conscious purchasing decisions based on sustainability. And if we miss that as part of the business environment which we're operating in, then we are lost. So I think that's a really encouraging impetus and catalyst for the work that we're engaged with today. Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you very much, and I'm sorry for the animation. That was obviously on auto, whatever it was on. So, but thank you very much indeed. So finally, could I please invite up Tim Sullivan, who's the Global Energy Director at Rolls-Royce. Tim's going to share the collaboration you're doing with us and others, where that might go. Tim, thank you.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Sullivan. I work for Rolls-Royce. Good. It's really nice to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation to talk to you. I will promise to concentrate for the next 10 to 15 minutes, although my mind is kind of Ryder Cup based. I'm a keen golfer, and I'm keen to get updates on where the Ryder Cup is. So if one or two golfing terms slip in during these next 15 minutes, please forgive me. The Rolls-Royce organisation, as some of you may know, the question I get asked in taxis is it the car business? And the answer is no, it's not the car business anymore. This is the propulsion systems business that makes gas turbines, that makes engines for ships, propulsion systems, essentially. We're an organisation, a global organisation, still heavily operational here in the UK, but we have a global footprint over 50-odd countries. We employ around about 50,000 people globally. So a global organisation. In terms of the cost of utilities, energy, water, within Rolls-Royce globally, it equates to about £150 million if you take the fossil fueled energy that we use to develop and to test products before they go to our customers. So a fairly significant cost to try and manage within the overall organisation. The organisation has a clear position on sustainability. There are essentially three core aspects of our kind of environmental objectives. One clearly is around our product and its environmental impact in the marketplace. And there is a lot of research and development going into new products for the future that will fuel air transport going forward. The second strand to that is how we look after our own environmental emissions around our operational facilities. And then the third aspect of that is Rolls-Royce has got interest in the research and development of products that can be used in terms of renewable energy generation. So three broad strands. The area that I have responsibility for is around the operational emissions. So all of our facilities globally falls under my responsibility. As I've mentioned, we have 300 sites globally. So broadly speaking, that's the kind of the Rolls-Royce objective in terms of environmental reduction. And I want to share with you a couple of insights, which I think will build on some of the things that Andrew was talking about, quite specifically around investment in energy efficiency and sustainability going forward. And the first one really is around, in effect, trying to modify the way that the company makes decisions on investing in sustainability and energy efficiency. And it's essentially trying to shift the finance community to consider the whole life impact of investment as opposed to focusing around capital cost and the return on that investment. And I think that's a journey that remains a challenge within Rolls-Royce. It's a journey that we need to try and crack because some of the decisions and some of the focusing around capital investment for new facilities, for example, there's a heck of a lot of focus around trying to reduce capital cost of a new facility. And the argument goes, if we trim 5% off our capital costs, that really is quite valuable to the organisation. I'm trying to open up that discussion to ensure that it's the longer term, it's the whole life impact of those features. For example, if you try and factor in LED lighting, there's maybe a slight increase in capital cost associated with installing LEDs as opposed to an alternative lighting system. So the finance side may well look at that and say, well, hang on a second, we can cut the cost there because we can go for an alternative type of lighting system. But the actual key to this is to ensure that the way that the energy team or the energy people articulate this is to say, well, the impact of this over the whole life of that building or the technology is actually going to be more valuable to look at, and therefore we can make a good case for increasing the capital cost in a project. Over the last couple of years, Rolls-Royce has grown its global footprint by about 25%. So this is an issue that's kind of really live within the organisation. In terms of what we do, the standards that we use, and the investment decisions around new facilities and the provisions for energy and sustainability within those new areas. The second insight is really just sharing some thoughts with you about the ensuring alignment between the environmental objectives of an organisation and the cost objectives as an organisation. And I think large corporations like Rolls-Royce are, structured in terms of how responsibility is split between finance, health, safety and environment, and energy and property. And I think some of the themes that Andrew picked on earlier about ensuring alignment and working together across those functions is quite important. So you get the business case as crisp and as clear as it should be. And also, given the fact, Rolls-Royce have made projections about our future energy costs, and if we do nothing, we're anticipating that energy costs globally will rise by about 5%, broadly speaking. So in other words, to keep still in terms of our cost base, we have to reduce our consumption by 5%, broadly speaking, to keep that kind of cost level. So in other words, what that's pointing to is a need to be more ambitious when it comes to energy reductions in order that you can provide overall cost reductions going forward to the business. And then finally, and I suppose really it was the reason why I was invited here to talk to you, it's really just to promote this idea. We've in a collaborative team of which Rolls-Royce is one member, JRP Solutions is another member, and there are other brands, I think, represented here today that have taken part in a collaborative workshop over this last year to develop a tool which we're inviting you to maybe participate in a pilot going forward. So there's a series of questions that I just want to answer those questions. The first one is, does anybody know how Rory McIlroy is doing? Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to say that. What do we mean by resource efficiency? Well, what we meant, we were quite specific about what we meant here. It was specifically around energy, around water, and around waste. So when we talk about resource efficiency in terms of this particular aspect, it is on those three topics that we're concentrating. Why is there a need? Well, there's a need certainly within the community that we were dealing with. There is a need for some form of high-level assessment to be able to be made of where an organisation is that has multi-sites, where an organisation is that has multi-suppliers providing services to that business. How can we in effect kind of benchmark or position an understanding of where those individual components are in relation to energy, water and waste? And the idea was that we would use the white label marking system, so you kind of get A to G type rating. It's a well-known measure. And so we're developing and have developed over the last year a kind of a tool that can be used in doing this. Who's been involved? I've mentioned that JRP Solutions, Rolls-Royce has participated, and a number of other parties around here have participated, around this room have participated. The value is we're able to identify areas that need to be focused on. So there are a series of questions, a part of the overall approach. And it allows us to pinpoint whether policies are in place, whether improvement programs are in place, how successful have those improvement programs been. It's those sorts of questions that ultimately will give you insights into areas that perhaps need some further focus and some further investigation. When do we expect the tool to be available? Well, for piloting, it's available right now. And I think there's an invitation out there. Well, we would like to extend an invitation to you all to say, if you're interested in participating in the pilot, as we roll forward, then please speak to either myself or somebody in JRP Solutions or 2 Degrees who've been helping here as well. So that's essentially what we're looking for. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Tim. So we've got plenty of time now for some questions and answers, both from the internet and from you, the floor. So I know Dr. Greg Lavery would like to kick off the first question. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind. We've got a couple of roving microphones. If you could introduce yourself when you get the microphone, that would be fabulous. And if you can share. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin. Greg Lavery. Question for Chris at ASDA. What we see is some great sustainability work that you're doing, and obviously Walmart has a very strong sustainability leadership position around the world. And yet we see, and you gave figures showing that consumers are actually quite interested as well in sustainability. Why is it doing that, man?
Don't know. He's just having a check.
Okay. The question is, and we're helping our clients with this problem as well, but wanted to hear your thoughts on why is it that from a public perspective, you're still advertising as a low-cost position against some really tough competition here in the UK. How is it that the sustainability factors haven't found their way through to product marketing and in fact brand positioning in ASDA? Is there something going on internally, or is that a push that's already coming through, but we're not quite seeing it in the advertising just yet?
Okay. I don't think that sustainability can be a premiumization of a market. We know that we talk to customers and you sort of pose the question slightly in reverse, which is, do you want to pay more for a sustainable product versus this non-sustainable product? The response you get is pretty clear. No, everything on the shelves is sustainable. We don't want to be making those types of decisions. We are imbuing all of our trust and faith in you for a variety of issues, from social dimension, environmental, the whole range of things. We expect you to do the right things on our behalf. And frankly, if you get it wrong, then we've got plenty of options to go and shop somewhere else. I think there's a piece here which we talked about. I don't believe that reducing waste does anything other than enhance my value proposition. So I am a value retailer. And I've got a range of customers, and we're also quite clear that when we talk to customers, they don't expect to pay more for it. But also on the other side, which is low-income families give up a response around, just because we haven't got much money doesn't mean we don't care. So that's why it's got to be, in my opinion, my business's opinion, it's got to be across-the-board improvements in all of our sustainability metric functions. It can't be that this is going to be led. And we know from already that this is very difficult to be just a straight market response. If the market solution was there, terrific, because we'd all be on a virtuous race to the top like crazy with customers thrusting fivers at us to get more with greener and greener products. That's not the reality of the British market. People expect us to do this on their behalf, but also expect me to have a value proposition in my stores.
Do you want to?
Well, yeah, I suppose that sounds great, and delivering as the underlying proposition is fantastic, and Marks and Spencer's do that as well. But from outside in, as a consumer, I don't see that on the marketing on TV that you're actually saying we're delivering that. Or do you think that's actually happening, or is there a gap there still?
That's probably a question my marketing director ought to answer. But it's a fair point, and it's one which frustrates me. I'd dearly love to be talking about other facets about our offer. I haven't got the above-line spend to do that, so I'm actually using the internet to put that information there. So it's more of putting information out. And the one example I would use is earlier this year, we put out a report on the sustainability of our fisheries, so the fish stocks that we rely upon. I couldn't advertise that in store, but I put a lot of messages out into the media, and that report is freely available. So I'm probably more in the camp of transparency rather than marketing.
It is an interesting point, though, because we've seen this in lots of places, with a number of not just retailers, but other organisations where they're doing amazing things particularly inside their supply bases. Really, some of them really interesting, engaging stories. And yet there's almost reticence, I think in the marketing departments perhaps where it sits, to use those stories and externalize them. And I keep thinking of a television program, Hairy Bikers, where they drive around, don't they, kind of a couple of big characters, and they drive around telling these stories about the food and cooking the food. Well, it feels to me there's an equivalent story locked away in a lot of our businesses in the work that we do, which is about opening out the inside in an interesting and creative way, not in a dull way. So anyway, it's just I do feel there's this story waiting to come out somewhere. Okay, another question. Jake.
Hello, Jake Backus from Coca-Cola. Amanda, can I just sort of make a sort of comment and share a personal experience related to what you have said to us? And when you talked about eureka moments, I felt there was actually quite a lot of people maybe ready to put their hand up, but you then said who are ready to, need the advice of the people in the room. So then we all kept our hands down. Because for me, there's no shortage of eureka moments, but actually we don't need advice. We kind of know what needs to be done. But for me, one of the biggest problems is actually our own organizations. And you said, you really try to pump us up in terms of the opportunity. But I think, my personal experience is many businesses don't respond to opportunity. I'd been jumping up and down saying, we need to do this, we need to do this. And somebody said, okay, you do it then. So, oh, great. And I actually managed after some considerable time to get some senior sponsorship for it. But then our technical department had a review of the 400 innovation projects that they're working on, and it came down to sort of a vote. And unfortunately, mine didn't make it. Personally, I think democracy is overrated. And so ultimately, but what businesses absolutely will respond to is risk. So I liked, for me, of your 10-point plan or the structure, I really like number 2. Well, for me, it's to create new corporate structures, because I think many businesses find it very difficult to take a holistic view and decision on many projects. What's one department's opportunity is another department's cost. So they can't make those easy decisions. And of course, number 10, the long-term view. When you take a long-term view, there is no alternative but to take a sustainable strategy.
Amanda, do you want to respond?
Sure, thank you for that. Around the Eureka moment point, that is really, really helpful. It's exciting to hear, I guess, that there would have been a lot more people who put their hands up who sort of aren't going to talk about it today, but have those moments and need to scale through. We work with innovation teams across sectors, and it's fascinating the different, and something I probably didn't emphasize enough, but we heard from the other speakers here, is the way that culture plays a huge role in how those ideas are able to get to the experiment or the enterprise level, let alone beyond that. So fascinating to hear sort of your story of the Eureka moments. And I guess the question is, how can we enable more of those to reach the light of day, depending on whatever company you're in? Because I think talking about them only helps other people. If you're not able to do it, who else on your team might pick that up a few years down the line? So, but really, really interesting to hear that. I think in terms of the risk and opportunity piece, I did mention that's our challenge at Volans that we've set ourselves right now, and really taking that feedback on board. I think the question is, for us, who might respond to opportunity a bit more? What companies or what senior leadership might consider that a really important point to provide a competitive advantage? And if not, then no, but rather than focusing on the sort of efficiency as sort of a percentage reduction, but rather increase in value as a result of that reduction, I think is an interesting side of the coin that we may not play with enough. But so that's how where we're focused on, really going to take that on board. And actually, Astrid in the back is focusing on that research piece on our side. So we'll hopefully share more the next 2 Degrees event on how that's moving along. And the answer might be risk it is. There we are. But we'll see.
I'd like to just kind of build on that conversation with me and ask the other panelists to join in. So one of the things that struck me listening to your talk was that there was necessarily some cultural change that took place, whether it was in the capital financing departments around whole life costing, or whether it was in the finance department itself, and suddenly realizing the return on investment for LED lights isn't very much, but boy, avoiding the downside is huge. Or whether, of course, it's the building of that trust between suppliers and the customer or within the supply base. So I wonder if each of you could comment on who do you engage with inside an organization, and how do you get that sort of change in culture?
Yeah, and just talk about Bupa first of all. I think you're right. The cultural change is almost the most fundamental thing that you have to address, and there's lots of ingrained behaviours you've got to overcome. And I think kind of the way we got through it with us, or started to, is simply by a battering ram, really. So there was so yes, you've got to integrate in planning, and yes, you've got to do the business cases, and yes, you've got to do all of that. But there's this fundamental habit, which is, well, I really want to spend it on growth and building new care homes. I really can't be asked about LED lighting. So the way through this really was actually like, we're just going to do it, right? So there was a decision and a mandate, and I think we're helped by our CEO and CFO. It's just, we're just going to spend 30 million quid on this, and it's going to be focused on that. And so that sort of battering ram just sort of started shifted things, and then raised the awareness of that. And it's interesting how it started to pick up a sort of a level of momentum. So that's kind of where I get to. It's not that scientific. It's just a bit brute force to a certain extent, with a lot of professionalism.
I would say ditto to all of that. I think we've spoken about, there's a couple of words there that I just want to pick up on. One is around confidence, and one is around trust. And I think at the heart of all of this, the heart of certainly within our organisation, the challenge that we face. It's around having confidence in the outcomes from particular activities. And that's about some experience, but it's also about articulating that clearly within the organisation so it's clearly understood. And then there is a level of trust required. I think that's the key part of all of this. It's around just understanding that the investment opportunities are good business cases, but then you have the trust of the finance community and other stakeholders to allow you to make that change.
Timing does not help. And I think the roles that we perform within this room, I sometimes characterise as it's our job to fill the toolbox, and then it's up to the business to decide. So yeah, I built this Stiltson. It might not be this week you're going to use it, but there might be a few months' time and it's the right solution. And the biggest problem I have in sort of getting my team on this is, yes, it's a great idea, but it's not the right time for it. So just park it. We can always come back round for it. So it's a facet of, oh God, I've stopped using that word. It's a sign that I think you can sort of be persistent, but there's no point in continually hitting your head against a brick wall. You've got to then let it go and move on to something else. And so I think that when the timing is right and almost the planets align, then it works. And the other thing I would say is business cultures and company cultures change. And that's sometimes a reflection of the personalities and people's interests and their pursuit. And when those come right, then there's enormous amounts of benefit to be had. Whereas if you've got blockers, then I think you just need to recognise it and then go back to a stage of filling the toolbox up again.
Thank you very much. Question over there.
Conor Casey, Casey Technology. A question for Andrew. I was interested in that you put a number on the risk of inaction. I'd like to know his approach towards that and how he actually arrived at the 18 million.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the whole question.
So how did you work out to arrive at the figure of 80 million for inaction?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically an opportunity cost. It was it's a calculation done with, I think I'm right, Lauren, with the Carbon Trust. So essentially, the principle is really around the opportunity cost of rising fuel prices and our volume of usage. So it's basically an opportunity cost calculation, and that if you follow me. But very importantly, this wasn't just me or somebody else making up the number. It was actually a validated number through the Carbon Trust. It's very easy to say, oh, well, they could have risen 10% and we saved X. This actually is a validated opportunity cost number.
Yeah, thank you.
Mike Evans, Icelandic Sea Chill. Answer for Tim, they're all square through 7 and we're 2 up in the other three matches. But my question is actually to Chris Brown, where you say he didn't engage the commercial team. We're major suppliers to another supermarket chain who apparently have lost £250 million from their bottom line. Unfortunately, the commercial people have a lot of power. We're in the chilled products, and the commercial team decided they wanted vac pack rather than gas flushed. So where we were just blowing a bit of inert gas over our product, we now have to suck a vacuum out, and that takes more energy. So there is a conflict. I wonder if you get the same sort of stories from your suppliers when you're trying to engage them. And are you educating your commercial team?
Oh, gosh, if life was that easy. I think that's time frames. And to be fair to the backpack, because we're also introducing it, it actually gives us some sustainability benefits in terms of shelf life and packs. So there is never going to be a simple answer to this. There just unfortunately isn't. And it's a matter of being able to have enough of an influence with them. Now, one of the points I was asked for, what am I trying to do next? And that's to get to the start of the MPD process. Because unfortunately, I am not at the present moment in time having that influence. I'm almost tidying up once they've done what they wanted to do, and get in right at that phase and start to put a sustainability filter or a raw material, especially on fish, a raw material stewardship filter, right at that point, and then build those in. And I know there are other companies which are also just starting to do that, and I think that's where we'll start to address some of the issues which you raised there.
Chris, it's fair to say you have an advantage in the program that you manage over this other retailer, in that it's owned by commercial, isn't it? It's a trading, the SSE is a trading led program.
It's owned by the food director at exec level.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. That the beating heart. Every sort of different sort of organisation has something that is its beating heart. Whether it's engineering in Rolls-Royce, or it's the commercial team in a retailer, or it's brand in a FMCG branded goods. They have got to be mobilised to own these projects. I'm sure you're all very aware of that. But the difference is that we see, looking in at lots of different organisations, when that works, it is totally different. Totally different impact on the organisation. Another question over there in the corner, and then we'll come to here. Just there and then.
Thanks. Hello, it's Phil Reed from Veris. We work on both sides of the supply chain, on the retail side and on the manufacturing. We're involved in a lot of energy reduction projects, and we hear the aspirations day in, day out. But I'm really interested in asking the panel is how they view the third-party operated and funded solutions to avoid having to invest a lot of future capital expenditure in these energy and waste and water reduction projects.
Tim, do you want to kick off?
Absolutely, yeah. I think from my company's point of view, and I think this probably applies to other manufacturers as well, I wish I had a finance director a little bit like Andrew would give me £50 million. That would be great. But I don't have access to that level of investment. Now I know I could make a real impact with £50 million. I know it. So I think it's a balance between utilising the resources that you have available internally, and an organisation like Rolls-Royce has access to preferential credit lines. So the external funding is not a commercial benefit. It might be, if you like, a strategic benefit to start to think about. And one of the things that we're doing is getting our ideas clear about how we're going to invest in which areas of technology we will invest our own money, and which areas of technology we will look to external funding. And I think the way that's playing out currently in my mind is that we would look towards building our renewable generation side of the business in the external funded model, and we would continue internally investment within our facilities using our own money.
I've got a couple of comments. One was, in my experience, it may not be for all of you, but I've never yet seen anybody spend their CapEx budget. So certainly, so therefore, part of the belief was the fact that it looks like that therefore we could afford to commit to it. So there's a slight element to the fact we actually had the funds. The second thing is that in terms of sort of when you go down that sort of path, it starts to get more complicated, to be honest. And therefore, at this point, we've just taken a more simple approach and used our own funds. But it is something that we're thinking about. I think for me, a critical aspect is simplicity and clarity around what you're doing, because it's hard enough to persuade people to do it with a straightforward organic investment, let alone sort of get a third party involved and the complications of financing. But it does need to be solved.
Do you want to pick up and comment on this conversation? Yeah. Can we just from the floor for a second, and then we'll come in.
Hi, my name is Chris Irwin from WEMS International. We're making a proposition for energy savings around controls, and normally the payback's about 2 years. So and we are absolutely finding this issue of people not making decisions about it, saying, well, we haven't got the money this year, we'll put it in the budget next year, thinking, well, in the meantime, you're still losing money, and you could be paying for it. Then we go, well, we'll de-risk it, we'll guarantee savings, we'll finance it for you. And they go, no, we don't want to do that, because we want all the return, we don't want to make it complicated. And then it sits there and it doesn't get done. So it's a kind of really interesting psychology that we're wrestling with and trying to understand better. But this, it's a conundrum because there's a reluctance to do financing, even though it also de-risks it by saying, well, you don't pay unless you get the savings. And yet there's this desire to only do stuff because it's simpler on CapEx. And then there was one situation we have where we're making a third-party finance, and they said, yes, we're going to go for that. And then there's a change of CEO, and everything changes, of course. And then the situation there is that they're saying, well, actually, no, we're not sure now who's responsible for this within the organisation, because it's not CapEx, it's financing, and it falls between departments. So I suppose it's not really a question exactly, an observation, but I think this is crucial to a lot of investment. There's also an issue of the contrast between renewables, where people are willing to commit, and this is the question, committing to paybacks where it's typically 6 years plus, and yet not doing the 2 year what I would call lower hanging fruit. So perhaps you could, I'd be interested in comments on that.
Just a brief thing. First of all, you have all of my sympathy and empathy, and I recognise all of the issues you describe. I think that the one thing which has helped us a lot is because we don't have shareholders, we've made the CO2 reduction target very, very real, and it's built into a lot of people's bonuses. And it's also something that our CEO bashes on about a huge amount. So interestingly, that's one thing that has actually sort of brought more alignment. I'm not going to pretend that we've got perfect alignment, but that's one way of doing that. And there is this element of we are going to hit that target come what may. So it's bringing in that non-financial target, which has helped, I think, in terms of cutting through some of the debris. Yeah.
Can we take a question down here from the front? And then there's one I gather from a remote viewer to come and join us.
Thank you, Martin. Mark Line from DNVGL. It's a question for Amanda, although in a sense I'd be interested by the other panelists' comments. Amanda, you talked about your Hello. I was intrigued by your 5-step model from Eureka through to ecology and then economy. And I think my question is about, when you've achieved real success and you're looking at market transformation, and I wondered whether you have any perspectives on what lessons could be learnt with all that's happened around the kind of carbon market 20 years on, with kind of Kyoto unravelling, the carbon price crashing, and it's not a kind of great case study of how to kind of transform a market. So looking back, what lessons can we learn, and what might that mean for businesses looking forwards?
I'm going to actually try to combine very quickly that question from the back and yours, because an example popped to mind actually from a trip to Sri Lanka, where there was a supplier named Brandix who I think faced the same question of how are we going to invest in some of these ideas, but also sort of scale it up. And they put a fund to the side, and they said, if you have an idea that we should actually be investing in, but we don't quite have it internally, you're going to stop working for us. You're going to become an entrepreneur, and you're going to build that as a third party. We're going to take an equity stake, and you're going to sell that to all of our competitors as well, because if it's actually about resource efficiency, then we're going to need it, but so are they, and therefore that's part of our funding strategy. And I just think it was an interesting way of turning that on its head a bit and thinking of new ways to get those ideas to scale. And to your question, I think we would be foolish to think that any attempt at ecosystem or economy is going to be simple on the first go. And so I think carbon is a really, really fascinating example if we can learn from it in terms of how the pricing and shifting to the economic valuation of carbon has had sort of stumbling blocks. And I think that's key to the redefining education as well. I mean, at the London School of Economics, you had the Stern Review, and you have Stern Review V2, and sort of the question around discount rates and what actually is that value gets even messier when we go into the social implications of a lot of the stuff we're working on. So I think all I'd say is I hope that that is fully recognized and that we're learning from where it stumbled, because it's surely not the last time, carbon aside, that we're going to have to embed some of these wider values and risks into the way we think about economics and finance. And in terms of more detail on that, sort of happy to chat after on the carbon issue itself, but I would just be ashamed to see those attempts to jump from ecosystem to economy to just fail, and then we sort of ignore what else we could have done with it.
Okay. From the World Wide Web.
So this is a question for Andrew. You mentioned the importance of using good data to tell a good story. What data do you find most compelling?
I think, as per my earlier thing, it's simply just what is that level of CO2 reduction. I mean, we can monitor that. I'm not sure it's daily, but it's almost on an immediate basis from all of our sites. So having that as one clear, very compelling measure helps, and then linking that into the incentive schemes has been. So I'm not sure who's talking at this point, but it's been the critical element of making that happen.
Can I check? Is this a Bupa employee that's asking this question? No, it's not. Okay. Does anybody else have a view on what data is most powerful inside?
You go ahead.
Good old-fashioned pounds, shillings, and pence don't half make an impact, because people are used to working in those lines. and then almost if you can get a conversation around the technical performance improvement and then an allied sustainability and performance improvement, that makes it much more compelling in my experience.
I think the only thing I would add to that is a well-written business case that will help present a compelling picture and obviously supported by good quality data. And this is about the capability of the people working in this field to produce quality information to allow decisions to be made, the right decisions to be made.
Just very quickly on that, of course. The other one, which occasionally works, is looking at what the competitor set's doing. So CEOs get very nervous when they feel that they're being left behind.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, very true. Last question.
Good morning, Mark Varney from FareShare, a food redistribution charity. I'm just interested in how, from a risk point of view, I thought it was very interesting, and you talked about monetizing the risk of inaction, as Martin highlighted, and when you're looking at applying true cost accounting principles, how you can assess the externalities on that and what sort of ratios you put into the decisions the business makes. From a social point of view, we see decisions made where the impact to external stakeholders will be worth 20, 30, 40 times more than the impact to the business, but still the business is forced to make a decision not to invest in that particular behaviour. So just trying to get an understanding about how you would cost account against those sorts of decisions.
Could you just give us an example to illustrate the last point you made?
Yeah, I'd love to. Quite specifically, a lot of carbohydrate manufacturers will sell perfect food to animal feed manufacturer, or will be forced to provide food into their waste stream because it's easier not to segregate, but actually to work with their waste manager to send that to anaerobic digestion. Now that food could be worth carbohydrate £300-400 a tonne. Some of the high value ready meals at several £1,000s per tonne, but the businesses make a financial decision to not segregate and to not redistribute.
Or at least a short-term financial decision based on current known parameters and options.
Which isn't a criticism, it's an understanding of that situation. So how do you internalise that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there are cases simpler than the examples that you actually sort of raised, but I suppose the approach that we take is the fact that we do concentrate on what the true actual cost saving is. We obviously build into the business cases the understanding of what the CO2 reduction is and the other benefits are. So we reflect it in the business case as best we can. And so that's basically what we do, I guess. I mean, often though we find that if you've got a 4 or 5 year payback, which is typical for most of the things we're doing, that's normally enough to actually sort of drive it through. It may be that ours is a bit more direct in terms of what we're doing, because we're talking most of what we're doing is around energy usage in a care home, so it's very, very direct. So we don't have perhaps that level of externality and knock-on effect that others do. But I understand your complications. I'm not sure I'm necessarily giving you a complete answer on that, and maybe somebody else can help.
Last comment from Chris. And then,
I think the other factor which you need to put into that is also the reputational risk. So yes, carbohydrates are fine, but if I've ended up putting gelatin in there and I contravene animal byproducts legislation, then a fine and the prosecution and a fine is not something I want to bear. So there is another piece to that particular jigsaw.
Thank you. So just as a thought, remember I mentioned at the beginning we've got this initiative around with NIST about waste to resource. I think there was the beginnings of a great opportunity of somebody looking for resource. And this room is full of food manufacturers of one sort or another, so maybe we have a waste stream that could be converted to some extent. I'd like to thank our speakers and presenters for their great contributions, so thank you very much. Big round of applause for them.